Hi, I'm Mikey, and this is Tyler over here with the founders of the Innovative Start organization, also known as ISO. ISO is a nonprofit that teaches financial literacy to youth and young adults alike. Our goal is to educate and not persuade. And today we're going to hit on a few financial literacy topics. We usually try to touch on some current financial news and relevant information while also giving some tidbits about things that we also use on everyday simple more simple topics within financial literacy. So, yeah, first thing we want to go into is emergency funds. I know in our last videos and shorts, we kind of hit on savings, best practices, and things and that such. But yeah, Tyler, I'll let you hit it off first.
Yeah, so an emergency fund, again, different opinions always. Some people say 3 to 6 months of living expenses. That opinion also varies the age you're in or the age you are. Some would say, if you have a spouse and kids and a mortgage, you may want to be more towards the 6 month range of an emergency fund of all living expenses in your savings account. Or some would also have the theory of if you're younger, you don't need as much in savings and you'd rather invest more or pay off student loans or debt faster or focus on that more. And worst case, if you did lose your job for whatever reason, that's what an emergency fund is for, or some high expense pops up. Being young and more energized, you could supplement that income with another job, or you could get a job easier, or more maybe a more labor intensive job more quickly to pay off whatever is going on or things like that. So I it's really up to your discretion. I think emergency funds are important though. For example, I got rear-ended about a month ago. Thankfully, my car insurance covers. I was in a hit and run actually, so thankfully my car insurance covers hit and runs. If it didn't, it would be a $4,000 price tag to get my car fixed. And so let's say if I didn't have insurance that covers that, well, if I had an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, I would be able to have the cash on hand to immediately pay for that and not stress or worry about it, have to put on a credit card or go into debt for whatever reason to make this fix on my car. So that's just a practical example of what I've gone through. I'll hand it over to you, Mikey.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think what you hit on too, and another thing I also want to talk about is credit card usage for emergency funds. A lot of people sometimes use their credit card as an emergency fund, like, especially if you don't have that money or you didn't save 3 to 6 months. I think the biggest issue is that this all goes into budgeting, right? Once you save, that saving technically turns into an emergency fund. So they all kind of trickle off of each other in that sense. Very important that one, when you're budgeting, that you're looking to have incentives with your saving, whether that's long term or short term goals. And then within those goals, what you're going to be looking at is right that emergency fund. Um, Regardless if you think you'll need something or you're like, oh, well, I've accounted for all my expenses. There's always the unexpected, just things of being a human being, right? Whether that's
Life be
something,
life.
yeah, life be life for sure. No, that's true because you'll never know, like, right?
Yeah.
Matt, you go to the doctor and they're like, you know what? Hey, your insurance doesn't cover this emergency fund and that. Just like Tyler's example where he was talking about being rear-ended, hit and run, right? Those are things that you have to add on to that, right? Because now he doesn't have the insurance of the other individual, and his insurance probably only covers a certain amount or whatever his policy is, and so that's another thing that he has to guard his way for an emergency fund. Um, let's say, hey, you are working as an hourly employee and rent is coming up, a little bit short. That emergency fund is what you're going to dip into to help you cover rent for that month. There are multiple ways that emergency funds are very, very important and apply to different situations. Even if you don't feel like you're someone who can save up 3 months, at least a month, at minimum to start with, and then work your way up. You'll never know when that money comes in, and it's always just good to have that money saved, regardless. And then when we say save, high yield savings account. Don't let your money just sit. So very important. Emergency funds can cover a lot of things, and most definitely get you through some big situations. But yeah, I think I've used both ends of having like a little bit saved up to cover an emergency and also using a credit card. When I say that's the best practice, but if you're in a tough times and you know that you'll have some income to potentially cover whatever you're using that credit card for in that emergency sense, then by all means, I think it's just best to have best practice between all of those. We've also discussed best ways to use your credit cards too in some previous videos. But yeah, overall, I would say like what Tyler's hitting on too, and what we're trying to also explain is, set your goals up, starts in the budgeting phase, how you want to save, and then, what is your short-term and long-term goals, and then also make sure that you keep in mind having that emergency fund built into those goals too. Um, you can have a setback on a short-term, long-term goal because that emergency fund is going to come in clutch for whatever current expense item that comes up. But yeah, I think those are really important, and I think that also kind of like details some of the economic situations now because if things are more expensive to you, healthcare wise, car wise, everyday life wise, that's just like I said, emergency funds are really important. Yeah. But it kind of leads us into our next topic where we'll talk about some of the interest rates and how that applies to you. So, uh, Tyler and I have also talked about these things on and off. We've also touched point of them in a little bit in the videos that we've talked about too as well. I think what the Fed announces with interest rates also shapes how the market moves. So it's very important in reality, whether you're an investor or just looking at overall economic trends, just paying attention to what they announce. Again, common misconception is that the Federal Reserve is a part of the government. It is not. It's its own separate entity. Go back and forth with people that all the time that assume they're hand in hand, but they are not. The Federal Reserve operates as its own system. How do you have any thoughts on that, or any thoughts on the current uh, news about the interest rates that I think it's Powell is his name, right? That's currently.
Yeah, I was looking on my phone. Like Powell just came out yesterday. So today we're recording this on March 20th. So yesterday Powell came out that he's holding interest rates to target between 4.25% and 4.5% for the federal for the funds rate and for the 3-year funds over the next 3 years for the funds rate. So yeah, I don't. I think there's a lot of back and forth. I don't. I guess it's just really interesting because there's some opinions like the tariffs will create short-term inflation, but long-term it will bring high GDP growth. I'm not sure yet. I mean, from my opinion, I'm just curious to see how things go. But interest rates are interesting because they factor into everything, just like you said, from credit cards to car loans to mortgages, even buy now, pay later services. Anytime you're lending money, in my opinion, the federal funds rate will affect that because it's essentially the benchmark that anyone will get from an interest standpoint off of their money. So I think it's a very important thing to watch. And then you can go online and look up like the federal funds or the Fed's interest rate decision, like the dates, things like that. It's very interesting. Trump was not happy. He made a statement today against Powell. Trump's not supposed to be able, or any president is not supposed to be able to have a say so in interest rates.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's very, very interesting dynamic right now, to say the least.
Yeah, I think that's another misconception that happens. Like again, like I was saying, like it's its own entity. So if there was influence from the government side, that would have caused a lot of complications, I guess, for how the system is supposed to work. And the old another point too is that a lot of the times what goes into the decision for interest rates is the two basic kind of concepts, right? To not lead the economy into a recession. So whenever these interest rates are pushed, those are in mind, and then to also keep up with economic growth. Essentially, it's like a kind of temporary plan or adjustment to make sure that the economy within the U.S. stays on a consistent path as best as possible. That's just a very simple thing. It's a little bit more complicated than that as far as like all of the things that go into it. But if that's what you want to look at it as far as like trying to apply it to like a simple scenario, then yeah, you those interest rates adjustments impact everything from the well, anything that includes some type of interest rate, right? You're getting a loan, car, home, student loan, whatever. Those interest rates impact um, what goes into, I guess, the overall decision to impede a recession happening. Now, I think a lot of times the recession word is thrown around to. There's a lot of factors that also play into
Or
that. Yeah, it's a kind of like fear mongering kind of word in one way, and also one of those things where people are like, you know what, I feel like I've always been in a recession. I feel like if you're somebody who doesn't come from a strong economic background, that might, come off that way. But at other times, people who have different investments or, they have a home or things like that. If you're looking at it from the perspective of, I don't have any of these things, right? You're a college student. Most you have is your apartment and the pizza in the fridge or whatever, and you're just like, yeah, I'm chilling. For those who are not college students or high school students, and you're just chilling, and you're like, yeah, I've worked and I'm seeing these changes impact me, currently. That is most likely what you're seeing as far as like those adjustments to the Fed interest rates. But
yeah,
yes.
one other thing I'll say is when one thing we'll notice and that I think everyone should be aware of, whenever the Fed lowers or higher interest rates, it sometimes it takes a lot of time to get flushed out in the economy.
Hmm.
So it's immediate in the markets, as in like the governmental bonds you can look at, but sometimes when it comes to consumers, in my opinion, I think it takes more time to flush through. And so again, if we want to talk big economic picture, that's why we had record low interest rates during COVID, and when everybody refinanced that already had assets, it was a good for them.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, for people that did not have a home to refinance, they were not able to benefit from a mortgage standpoint on that refinance.
Yeah.
So um, that's just something to think about. Again, we're not going to sit here and complain. It is what it is now. There's things that we can all do knowing this information now to better ourselves financially in the future.
Yeah, like Tyler's saying, there's the immediate kind of feedback you get within the market as a whole, and then there's the kind of like trickle down effect that happens afterwards, as far as like the actual implementation, how it starts to impact some of those consumer goods, and things that you are invested in loan wise. Um, but yeah, those are some really good points, and I think overall, like the interest rate is also like when they shape and push it out is impacted by the decisions that we make, um, from that economic political spectrum. But yeah, so and that's really key within the current tariff situation and what our last video talked about, but how that impacts and shapes as far as like the short term feel of what a tariff or trade war looks like, and then long term. So obviously, whenever you look to increase tariffs, right, there's a long term goal. Most times, when you're implementing something, from that factor of the economic kind of place, it's not going to be extremely immediate. It might take a few months, years, or whatever. So sometimes the impact is not felt right away. With trade, essentially what happens is that there's a lot of things going already, right? Previous deals made, etc., on whatever interest rates, right? So a couple months go by and you might not feel a difference yet until things are actually there. Now, what also happens within a trade war, and as we discussed in the last video, is that when one country says, hey, I'm going to raise those tariffs, another country can do the same. And that's when a trade war happens, right? Whenever trade in its basic format is that you're trying to one equal good for another, um, from basic like, hey, I have this video game I don't really like anymore, and whatever. Here you go in exchange for another video game that you don't like, but I like, right? It's a what is it, arm's length sometimes it can be referred to as far as like the trade goes. But sometimes a lot of things that can impact that, right, is seasonal goods, fruits, vegetables, things that can be produced in other countries. Um, what is it? Technological items, chips, anything related to that can also impact, right? Depending on where the um, what is it? The manufacturing um, pieces go. So some things can be manufactured in the U.S. and a lot of times when you hear talks about it, they're like, we want things made within the U.S. But still, at the end of the day, your car that could be U.S. made still takes foreign parts. Um, and that's another thing too. I feel like people also have misconceptions on as well. But yes, any type of product, right? If it's something that needs to be mined and it's not mined in that country, you need to get that product in order to, manufacture it into the end and final good. That is all impacted by those tariffs, and that is also impacted by those interest rates too, as far as like the investment. All plays hand in hand in that sense. I don't know if you agree or not, but that's just kind of my viewpoint on it. As far as like you just need to have a base level of understanding to see how that shapes, and also pull in those discussion pieces of things that you hear, whether it's like news article, friends and family, having a baseline understanding, and then being able to pull those pieces again. Um, that'll help you just overall kind of see the viewpoint or the trends that'll be happening, make you, make some better financial decisions, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's all good. I mean, if you think about it, any large company is going to have to borrow money. So
Mm-hmm.
with interest rates, at least in the United States, they whatever, if one company is looking to if a farmer is looking to grow corn and they need to buy the seed, they may not have all the money that they need on in cash. So they'll have to borrow that money from the bank. That borrowing money from the bank, interest rates directly affect that, and then the farmer can't, farm the goods to then send it over the United States and then also around the world. So it's all interchangeable, which is pretty crazy to think about. It'll blow your mind a little bit.
Yeah,
No, but it's good. I
that's
mean,
good.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, and then also it continues after that because if the farmer can't sell their goods and another country that they sell their goods to or raise their tariffs as well, that also impacts that same farmer. Those are all the factors that come into that one scenario. But yeah, that was
Yeah, I mean, we're
great to
seeing
mention.
this right now. What is it like, with Mexico? Um, we don't want avocados grown in the United States. I don't think they're going to be the best. I think
Hmm.
it's better when they're from South America, things like that. But if there's political beef, for lack of better words, between our countries, that starts to get affected, and it's just a lot of just I guess for lack of better words, honestly, just political drama. And he said, she said, we're seeing that a lot right now. Also, I think it's just been important whenever we're on social media, there's a lot of buzzwords and things, especially these very large topics, and people think it's so easy, but it's not. These are huge, like billions and billions of dollars worth of goods just traveling back and forth all around the world. And one small TikTok video is not going to explain everything, unfortunately. And these are very complex problems. I think we all need to remember on both sides of whatever viewpoint there is on the trade. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's very interesting. I think it's also just respect. And I think certain countries need to respect other countries of, hey, you grow this good or this is created good in your country. Like, let's buy it from you. Um, China does a lot of really good manufacturing for a few things. So I think there's some respect to be made there. And then there's also the aspect of geopolitical tensions with global trade. If there has been times where there have been accusations against some countries stealing intellectual property from other countries' goods or products. That's a big deal. And if intellectual property is essentially like this mouse that I have on my computer. If this mouse is designed in one country, but it's made in another country, well, the country it's designed in basically gives them the prototype and how to create it and the blueprints and everything to then go make the actual device. Well, the country that it's made in can essentially just steal those renderings
Hmm.
or the build outs. So intellectual property is a really important and interesting debate. It's a whole nother topic
Yeah.
in this as well.
No, I think it's a really good analogy too, because like if you really think about it, right, one country will give you all the goods you need to make the cake, right? And then they give you the instruction manual to say how this is how you put it together. That is where it's manufactured, right? They gave all the production value as far as like all the goods needed to get to that point. Now, what that company can do is say, hey, if we have the resources to make, this item here, why don't we just do it ourselves? We know how it's supposed to be made. We already have the blueprint for it. I can bake this cake, and I no longer need grandma's recipe. Essentially, right?
Yeah,
I can do it on my
exactly.
own. That's no longer something that needs to come in. I don't need to go and get those goods or whatever else because I'm producing those goods myself. I can manufacture myself, and then that's where we get to. And I think that's a lot of times what people would like to happen in the U.S. as far as like when goods should be produced and manufactured within here. But what comes with that is that there are certain things that can't be, right? When we look at seasonal goods, like certain food items, there are reasons why particular countries produce and sell certain things, right? And there's a whole nother thing, like I don't even want to get into, but oil, for example. Those are some hot topics, right? But I think overall, most normal people, oil obviously and gas that impacts you, but like the things that you see on the shelf when you walk into the grocery store, that is all impacted by those trade wars and such. And you may not be seeing a significant difference right now. It may be a few cents or whatever, but down the line, if things like those tensions get a little bit drastic or, it's getting harder because those costs can be pushed to the end user slash consumer. So what you want to do is make sure you're paying attention to that. Those are important. That's why a lot of the times, like I said, and the whole importance of financial literacy is that you want to make sure that you're understanding these things so that you can move around or be able to explain those to those around you who might not be understanding or just give your viewpoint too as well. But yeah, having a baseline understanding in anything like that, as far as like the interest rates, trade wars, global tension with that, what is the goal, right? Because I think a lot of times people are like, it's just whatever political factor, right? But if you want to implement something, you have to have a goal, and for people to back you, they got to understand that goal too. And there's probably understanding from an economic level of, yes, let's go ahead and raise those tariffs, but what is the end consequence? Are you willing to deal with that consequence? How does that impact the everyday consumer within the U.S.? And then that other country is also doing the same thing for its citizens, etc. So,
Yeah, I mean,
extremely important.
yeah, one thing else, like another practical thing, at least from a United States perspective, is like we like look at Detroit. The city has just been ransacked or just depleted because of the car manufacturing factories left the city, and some of them have even gone to other countries with cheaper labor,
Mhm.
all for the guise of just um, cheaper labor, increasing profit, things like that. I'm sure there's a lot of things that I don't know about that went on within the companies and the boardrooms. But just from an outside perspective, like that, this is something important. I mean, that sucks. That hurts the Detroit, not only the people in the Detroit, but I can only imagine the other people through similar situations or um, scenarios that lose their jobs. It's a tricky situation. We're dealing with emotions and
Mhm.
people's livelihoods, and then God knows how many generations have been in some of the factories in the United States, and this could be happening in other countries around the world. So man, just trade is
Yeah,
it's complex. There's a pros and cons to both. You want cheaper goods, well you can go do have the goods built in cheaper labor country. Also though, you lose jobs in your country you're in. It's just
yeah. It's like trying to find a middle ground, right?
yeah.
Because you can't lean either way because something is going to be impacted, right? And like Tyler was saying, just to reemphasize, you want cheaper goods, okay? Well, you can't complain about the outsourced labor for those cheaper goods, right? If you want, things to be, jobs and all of that stuff and things to be paid here, right? Then you're going to expect that those goods or end products are going to cost a little bit more, right? Because that cheap labor is going to give them another, they can still make profit and pay for that cheap labor. They're paying for people who are expecting, 70, 80, 90, up to 100K versus somebody they can pay pennies on the dollar. They're going to obviously try to find that way in order to, push through. And there's more to that, right? It's just a business model in that sense. And it's an economic kind of like impact on how companies move certain ways, right? Because you try to prioritize one thing, but you'll also impact another thing. And it's just important to just understand that um, you can't have the best of both worlds. So you have to find the middle ground and then deal with it as so and make adjustments too. So even if you're a young entrepreneur, right, these are things you can also think about too. This is important to understand the impact of tariffs, trade wars, um, also understand GDP. I think that's like literally kind of like a pinpoint in there. You got GDP and then all those things kind of spring from there because even the interest rate too. So, but yeah, so just to kind of wrap up on that, like I said, emergency funds important. How you built it out, how you plan for it, how much you save up for. That should all be within your budgeting schedule. We talked about the Fed interest rates, how that might impact you as a consumer, things to look out for too, and just how to apply that to a simple kind of like viewpoint. Um, and making sure that you understand those because it's important that goes into those other topics like we were talking about the global trade wars and things that have been um, coming off of the tariff announcements that have been going on for the last couple weeks slash month. So all important topics. Please let us know in the comments if you have any other info or opinion pieces about that. We would love to learn more about what some of our viewers think, but we appreciate your time. Tyler, anything from you?
Nope.
All right. Thank you. Leave a comment
Have a good
below.
one.
Like the video.